You're listening to Boomers Today with your host, Frank Sampson.
Well, welcome to Boomers Today. I'm your host, Frank Sampson. Of course, each week we bring you important and very useful information on issues facing baby boomers, their parents, and other loved ones. And as I always do, I thank all of you for all your support. So many of you have shared individual podcasts or the entire show with friends and family, and that's why our listeners are growing each and every day. And so many of you have been on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, iHeartRadio. There's a bunch of them out there that we're on. So thank you so much for listening. I hear all the time, we're the podcast you listen to on your walks in the morning. So that's great. It's always great to hear. Certainly not going to disappoint you today. We have with us Anna Geldman Edmonds, who is the publisher and managing editor of Reverse magazine. Anna created Reverse as a direct result of the years she and her siblings spent caring for their parents and the difficulty in navigating various issues along the way. As an experienced editor, copywriter, and award-winning journalist, she built this platform to provide caregivers the credible resources and information she couldn't find during her years as a caregiver. So, Anna, thank you so much for joining us on Boomers Today. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate being invited. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you. I know that your organization has a podcast too. Well, we'll get to all that, all the wonderful things you do.
Okay.
But, I'd love to hear just more what led up to all of this. You publishing and managing a magazine and your podcast and everything, maybe had to do with your experience as a caregiver, I'm sure, but I'd love to hear more.
Okay. Well, it actually started after I was a caregiver. I have a background in journalism, and I've been working in magazines for quite a few years, either as a writer or an editor, or then I created my own magazines. So that was my thing. And at one point, we were in an editorial meeting for a different magazine, not the one I'm doing now. And somebody brought up, it was a women's business magazine. It was a local women's business magazine. And somebody in the meeting piped up that we should do an article on these sandwich caregivers. A lot of women in business are single or even married, but they are caring for their children or raising their children while they're caring for someone else. And the youngest person in the meeting said, well, maybe we can do a special issue about things like that, but I don't think that belongs in this issue. And I kind of did one of those cartoony double takes. And I said, what did you just say? And she repeated it. And I knew then that a magazine was born. I was like, no, we're doing a whole magazine about caregiving. It just hit. So that was during COVID. We were having this meeting on Zoom and everything. So what was right before, anyways, it doesn't matter the timing. So I pulled everything together. I already know how to make a magazine, and I already have a bunch of freelance writers. So I went ahead and did it. For the very reasons you said in the intro, it was very difficult for me as the boots on the ground caregiver for my mother I didn't know what resources were out there. I didn't know what was available. I didn't know how to do this. I was a learning day by day thing, and I knew that there was help out there, but I couldn't find it, and I didn't have time to research it. I was busy running a business and caring for my mom, and I have my own kids. So I put a magazine together and got experts like you and your organization to come on and tell people how to do it better.
Well, that's great. So talk to us a little bit about your experience as a caregiver. I mean, I know that as I was reading your intro, caring for their parents along with siblings, I went through the same thing with my siblings and parents, and so it kind of hit home. But talk to us a little bit more about that and your experience as a caregiver.
Okay, well, I didn't get that much help from my siblings, not for lack of desire, but we all live geographically very far away from each other. One's in California, I'm in South Carolina, one's in North Carolina, and two are in Virginia.
Mhm.
And I was the one best suited and the closest emotionally to my mother. She was living in Virginia, so I brought her home to live with me after my father died. And she wasn't here too long, probably less than a year. And I realized that the what she could call being muddled in her head was actually, dementia. And I was afraid to be able to leave her home alone. I was working at home, so I didn't have any privacy. I live in a small house. And I couldn't leave her home, and we didn't really have a lot of funds to be bringing someone in. And she's an introvert. She didn't really want somebody here, an in-home caregiver while I was away. She didn't really like that. Not that she did dislike the women or the people that were coming to care, but it just wasn't her thing. And so I talked to my brothers who had POA for the finances and everything. I said, I can't do this. It's a danger to me and her, and we're going to have to come up with a different plan. And so we started looking for assisted living in the area. And so because they have POA, they made the final decision. The one brother came with me, and we looked at several, and they chose one that was not at the top of my list. It was a good 20 minutes or so, probably more, away from my home in a part of town that I never go to. It's just not in my circle where I hang out and do business. And I was concerned about that. And it was also, there was something about the aura about it. There was just something kind of gloomy about it. I know it was older, and that's okay. I wasn't looking for chandeliers and flowers on the table, but there was just something about it that didn't click, but my voice didn't count at the time, because I didn't have power of attorney. So we went ahead and moved her in there and everything, and she was there for about a year and a half, and her health, there were constant health issues and constant putting out of fires. I was down there all the time. Just the care was not good. And numerous hospital visits for, COPD issues and cellulitis issues in her legs, different things. And it was just getting the CNAs to do what they were supposed to do, what seemed minimal to me, but it wasn't being done. And so we finally had a meeting with the executive director, and he called me and my brother in and said that it was apparent that they were not able to give my mother the kind of care that she needed, which was ridiculous because everything she needed was in the checkbox that we went through on her care plan. So we just, gave each other 30 days, and we were out of there, and I moved her into a different facility, the one that was my first choice to begin with. And things went much better at that point. But her health declined in different ways because she was getting older and her kidneys were failing. But her care was much better. I was happier. She was closer to me. But you still are always putting out fires of some kind. It's never going to be perfect. And so it was very stressful to be called in the middle of a meeting to say your mother's being taken to the hospital, or your mother refuses to get out of bed today. Just interruptions to everything that's going on, plus your regular visits. And it was very stressful. And my end reward was that one day I got a phone call from, I had her in hospice in assisted living at the time because of her kidney failure. The hospice nurse gave me a call and said, I don't know how to tell you this, but your mother came back from lunch and laid down and took a nap, and she never woke up, and she passed very peacefully. So that was the beginning of the end of my caregiving journey. It was about 3 years all in all.
So I know that maybe some of your experience was a catalyst for you starting the magazine, as you said before, and the podcast.
Yeah.
So talk to us about that. I mean, I know one of the things you had mentioned to me before is that, that there was just kind of a lack of resources or, knowledge of resources. So talk to us about that and maybe your experience with that and how you think maybe
Yes.
have things changed. Yeah.
I don't think they've changed that much.
Mhm. Right.
I remember going into a doctor's visit with her and sitting in the waiting room, and there was a magazine on the table, several copies of it. It's called All About Seniors. They're all over the country. You can find them in just about every doctor's office. And I picked it up and like, oh my gosh, this is going to have everything in it I need. I was so excited. And since there were so many, I knew it was to take home. You know, it was something we could have. So I brought it home and I flipped through it and I realized it was not as a criticism, but it was nothing short of a directory of different services, and it was overwhelming. It was just mostly advertisements and listings of different services. And I didn't even know what services I needed. I just knew that I was the only person taking care of my mother, and there had to be a better way to do things. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. So I've since found out that All About Seniors is a great resource for professionals like doctors or anybody, for professionals. But I found it to be extremely overwhelming unless I knew specifically what I was looking for. So that was hard. I didn't know until I got into the business of all this that I know in South Carolina, our Department of Aging offers vouchers for respite care. And that's something I certainly would have taken care of, was to be able to take some time off and have somebody come into my home or drop in and see my mother, you know, where she was in my stead when I couldn't do it because I didn't have siblings who lived close by who could do that.
So was
I
South
didn't,
Carolina's best kept secret, huh?
it is a best kept secret. And I blab it all the time because
Right.
it's there for the taking. And I think that there's probably other things like that I haven't discovered yet. There are all sorts of programs and support groups. I would say the whole issue of self-care for caregivers was something that was a foreign notion to me until I started doing this. And I didn't realize that caregivers have a 63% higher risk of death than the person they're caring for because
Yes.
it is so stressful. And that's not okay.
Right.
If I'd
No,
known
it's
that, I would have told my siblings. The one thing I didn't know how to do, and it would have been nice to have someone in the know, and I counsel people about this all the time, is you have to learn to ask for help. And I didn't know how to do that. I never asked my siblings, hey, can somebody stay me for a while? I would like to go to the beach for the weekend, or I want to go visit my friend up in Maryland. I just need a break. It never occurred to me to ask my siblings to take time off. I should have done that. It took me forever to get up the courage to ask my brother, who was in charge of the money. I didn't even ask him. I just remember kind of complaining that it was getting very expensive, what was going on, and a lot of time and effort was going into everything. And he said, well, if you need someone to, mow your lawn, if you need an allowance to pay people to mow your lawn or clean your house, just let me know. And it was just like a miracle for me. It was like, oh, it never occurred to me to, that mom has money that she can give towards the upkeep of the house and her care and my care. I didn't know these things. These were things I stumbled upon, but it was already too late. I was gaining weight. I was tired. I wasn't sleeping. I was stressed out. My hair is much grayer than it was. I would say the stress of it was the hardest. And I know that there's people and organizations and nonprofits that will help with these things. And I didn't know where to go for that. I just didn't.
So Anna, you mentioned some of the things, but if you knew back then what you know now, all right.
I would have done a lot of things differently.
Talk to us. Talk to us about that. What would you have done differently?
In hindsight, the first thing I would have done was sold her house in Virginia and sold mine, and then bought a bigger house so that she could have her own wing and I could be in the house safely. And saving the money that we put into assisted living, I would have been able to afford to have someone come in it just would have been safer and easier for everybody, and my mother would have gotten used to it because I would have hired a regular person who she would have formed a relationship with. I wish that we had not had to resort to assisted living. Not that it's always horrible or anything, but it was a huge stress on me going back and forth. She didn't like the food. She's an introvert. She never really made any friends, and nobody helped her do that. So that was that part of it.
Yeah. So assisted living can be good for some, but for your mom's situation,
Exactly.
you felt it wasn't the right fit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think I would have been more forceful about some issues. I was very upset with the diet that she was eating. She was supposedly on a diabetic diet, but there was free range. I mean, I realize they can't keep food from the clients or from the residents that live there, but she was snacking all day on these cheap packages of crackers and cookies, and they had free access to Coca-Colas and stuff. There was a little fridge in the main room there, and they even told me she would wander back and forth at night just getting Cokes, and she shouldn't even really have Diet Coke, but they didn't even point her to the Diet Coke. She was just drinking sodas and things that she shouldn't have. And so her diabetes was never regulated, and I didn't have any help with that. I didn't realize until very late in the game that she was a candidate for hospice because of her kidney failure. It was when that was brought up to me, I was like, what are you talking about? She's not dying. And then they explained to me that hospice is not necessarily for people who are dying. It's for people who are in a position of possibly dying within the next 6 months. And when I met with hospice and realized what was available to us if she qualified, and it turns out she did qualify right away, my life changed exponentially right from there, because somebody would come in every day, get her out of bed, make sure she had all her hygiene products, she was washed and ready to go. The social worker would call me, the clergy person would call me, the nurse would call me. I wasn't making as many visits. She didn't have to go to the doctor anymore. The doctor came to her. It was just life-changing, and she probably should have been in hospice much earlier than she was, but nobody brought it up to me. I just didn't know.
Yeah, being educated is extremely important. Yeah.
Education, which is that's the approach I take with my magazine, is being very prophylactic about it, telling people there are things you can do differently.
Right. So, Anna, we're going to take a real quick break, I promise, just about 30 seconds, just to recognize our sponsor. When we come back, we'll talk more about that, how you, through your experience in caring for your mom, the things you learned, and we'll talk about the magazine and how it's helped others. All right?
Okay.
So do you know anyone who may be concerned about an older driver? Well, Senior Care Authority's Beyond Driving with Dignity program is a facilitated self-assessment program for older drivers. This program has been designed to serve as a vital tool to facilitate older drivers and their families as they make appropriate decisions regarding the future of one's safe driving career. If the individual is a safe driver, an advisor will provide him or her with strategies on how to remain a safe driver as they progress through the aging process. If driving retirement is the appropriate decision, then the individual and their family are offered possible alternatives, resources, and a specific plan to ensure a smooth and successful transition from the driver's seat to the passenger seat. So to learn more, go to www.beyonddrivingwithdignity.com or call 877-907-8841 to connect with a Senior Care Authority advisor in your area. So we are back with Anna Gelman Edmonds, who's a publisher and managing editor of Reverse Magazine. So Anna, you spoke to us about some of the, many of the challenges and maybe things you would have done differently while you were caring for your mom. And you said, hey, I'm going to try to help others who are going through this. And you started Reverse Magazine. So talk to us about the magazine and the podcast and
Okay.
commercial time. Go for it.
Okay, super. I call the magazine Reverse because very early in the game, I knew that I was in a role reversal with my mother, which is a very awkward thing to try and navigate. To be the parent to your parent, probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do, but fortunately I had a wonderful, wonderful relationship with her, and I explained it to her and asked her if she trusted me, and she said yes. So eventually got comfortable with it, but it is a reverse, a role reversal of sorts when you're caring for your parents. So that's the name of the magazine. The podcast is Navigating in Reverse, and you can find that on any of the podcasting platforms. And the magazine is it's a digital magazine. We don't print it anymore. The cost of paper went up by 80% after COVID. So it's a digital magazine. All the articles are free. You can find it at reversemagazine.us. And we just get people that know what they're talking about involved in the senior care industry to come up to contribute their expertise in article form, or sometimes we interview them and we write the articles. And it's all there for the taking. And the podcast, we bring on people just like you're doing here. I bring on people who have things that they can share that help make the caregiving role easier. So we are
I know you brought
marketing
on
to
one
the.
of our franchise owners in South Carolina on your podcast.
Oh my gosh, David Condon was awesome. One of our best podcast episodes yet about the driving.
Right,
Yeah, it was amazing.
Good. That's great. So, so tell us a little bit more. I mean, and I think sharing this, I know sometimes it might be difficult, but people learn from it. But, you know, how did kind of your caregiver trauma, how'd that get all revealed?
That's actually a podcast episode that I did.
That's a podcast
and I did it live. I did it live.
Right.
I did it live on my podcast, but I'll tell you how it started.
Yeah,
so I was at a network. I was at a networking event with, it was a senior care, it was people from the industry. It was a small networking event. And I was standing in a very small group of people just talking, obviously, about my caregiving for some reason, whatever. And whatever I was saying when I was done, one of the people in this small group of other people turned to them and said, Anna has caregiver trauma. And I didn't know what that meant. It just kind of, I hid on my face that I was stunned and I didn't say anything. And I don't really remember the rest of the conversation after that, but I thought about it for a day or two. I'm like, I wonder what that is. So I called her up and I was like, Melissa, do you remember when you said I have caregiver trauma? And she said, yes. Oh gosh, I'm so sorry. Did I embarrass you? And I'm like, I don't even know what that is. Like, what is that? And she goes, she started apologizing. She goes, oh my gosh, I thought you knew. I thought it was so obvious. And I said, well, then stop talking because you're coming on my podcast and we're going to talk about this because I've never heard of this before.
So it was a podcast.
And I have a few. Yes, if you go to my podcast and listen to, you can look for the episode, A Caregiver's War Story, or you can put it in the show notes of this one. I've actually had to do a encore episode of it because it was so popular. It's not something that gets talked about, and I can tell you the gist of the story is that she explained to me, because the person that said it to me is someone I know very well. She said, every time you talk about anything to do with your caregiving experience, your eyes tear up, your body language changes, and there's the tone of your voice takes on like an edge. And as she was saying that, I was like, oh my gosh, I know exactly what you're talking about. And she goes, I see it all the time in people. That's, someone who's wounded. And so we talk about that on the podcast. And I actually feel like I've made a lot of headway since then, just in recognizing that caregiver trauma is a thing. And I actually wrote an article in the magazine about it called Caregiver Trauma. And it needs talked about because nobody knows about it. I've brought it up a million times to people. Nobody knows what I'm talking about.
That's great. So, unfortunately, we only have just a 2-3 minutes left, and I didn't want to cut
Sure.
you short with this question, but and I think you've done a podcast on this, on why caregiver self-care is so critical. So maybe if you could talk to our listeners who might be going through
Sure.
this, or are going to start to go through this,
Yeah.
and why caring for yourself is so important.
Okay. The number one reason is you simply cannot pour from an empty cup. If you're not taking care of yourself, how in the world are you going to be able to take care of somebody else? And I learned that way too late. I had expended all my energy taking the best care of my mother that I could and let myself go. People who are caregiving are usually in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond. The stress of it will give you a heart attack, a stroke, depression, isolation, all of it. There's help out there. There is help out there, and you need to look for it. And if you need help looking for it, then log on to my website and contact me. I'll point you in the right direction. It's important to take care of yourself first.
Yeah. I mean, I always say, I'm sure you've heard it, and I've heard it so many times, where an adult child promised a parent,
Yeah.
don't worry, I'll take care of you. I'm not going to put you in a nursing home and all that. We've heard
Right.
that before. And sometimes it's just the guilt. They feel that
Yes.
this is, mom took
Yes.
care of me, I'm going to take care of her. I don't know if you felt that way, but
There's guilt for all sorts of things.
yeah, but you got to take care of yourself, or like you said, that statistic is mind-boggling. A lot of people I tell that statistic to, that you're greater risk of passing away than the caregiver is, than the person you're caring for. So that's a real stat, and so
It is.
yeah.
It is.
I so appreciate everything you do, and please check it out, reversemagazine.us. Anna Gelman Edwards, thank you so much for joining us on Boomers Today. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Again, share with friends and family our podcast and this show. Please be safe. We'll talk to everybody next week.
You've been listening to Boomers Today with Frank Sampson. To learn more about today's show, visit boomerstodayradio.com and join us next time for another edition of Boomers Today.